𝗀𝗏𝗋 resident and keen environmentalist 𝗀𝗁cie𝗿𝗆𝘆 is no stranger to the law. For over a decade, she's been devoting her time to protecting a 4,000-hectare conservancy on the outskirts of Joburg.
This is very unique in that we're literally on the edge of Johannesburg with built-up areas all around us. And there's this tranquil slice of paradise here.
As chair of GECO, the Great 𝗀𝗏𝗋 Conservancy, 𝗀𝗏𝗋 has been taking on the city of Joburg and big corporate developers, fearlessly defending the Conservancy's unique biodiversity and the residents' peaceful and somewhat idyllic existence.
I don't know if anyone can stop the development, and that's not necessarily the Conservancy's aim, but we want to make sure that development protects the environment no matter what happens.
It's a familiar story, a tract of land with delicate flora and fauna and species that have coexisted for thousands of years. Then a developer moves in and earmarks it for something that we as humans need. Shopping centres, housing estates, and the battle lines are drawn. Conserving land ideally located between Gauteng's two major economic hubs comes with difficulties. But in February this year, 𝗀𝗏𝗋 was met with one of the biggest challenges of her life, a 197 million rands lawsuit.
It's been extremely stressful. It's been very time-consuming to have to deal with this.
Kristen, explain the lawsuit to us. What does it say?
It basically sues me in my personal capacity, as well as the Conservancy, to reclaim alleged damages for delays due to the objections that were lodged during the public participation process.
The lawsuit has been brought by Century Property Developments and Riversands Developments, both owned by property development mogul Mark Corbett, who's been driving development in the area since the late 2000s.
That the intention is to join Johannesburg with Diepsloot and create economic activity and upliftment for everybody.
But this lawsuit against 𝗀𝗏𝗋 and GECO is argued to be a potential SLAPP, strategic litigation against public participation.
It is a means that is used usually by big, large corporate entities that are wanting to silence and/or exhaust finances for smaller public interest groups.
Schindler's Attorney's associate, Davina Naidu, specializes in environmental law and says she's increasingly dealing with this US-style corporate hardball strategy.
If you are not backed by a larger organization with significant funding, you may find yourself in a precarious position because of the fact that litigation is quite expensive.
For 𝗀𝗏𝗋, there's no doubt that the 197 million rands lawsuit is intended to intimidate her and other objectors.
We're being sued due to the alleged delays, but at the same time, it does feel like a bullying tactic, and we have argued that in our papers.
In addition to the exorbitant amount being claimed, the imbalance of power is often a characteristic of a SLAPP suit, explains independent advocate Ben Winks.
Where you're seeing an example of corporate bullying or even political bullying, a David and Goliath kind of scenario, that is one of the hallmarks of a SLAPP.
But Corbett says his aim is not to deter 𝗀𝗏𝗋 or the Conservancy from the public participation process. Now, it has been labelled as a SLAPP litigation. Do you agree with that?
I think it's an incorrect term for this because with the court case, we're basically looking for clarification on two issues with the court case. Is GECO in fact bound by their constitution, which specifically exclude Riversands from their area? And the second is, can they expand their conservancy without council's consent into an area that is earmarked for development?
Understandably, 𝗀𝗏𝗋 is wary of discussing the elements of the lawsuit.
We expect that the issues will be fully ventilated in the court during the course of the proceedings, so we won't be discussing that at this time.
The battle between Century Property Developments and GECO spans over a decade. According to Corbett, the ongoing dispute pertains to the development of a buffer zone between the Diepsloot township and the Conservancy.
Riversands at present is only about 15% developed. But if it wasn't for GECO, imagine where we would be. I think we'd be close to 70–80% developed.
But 𝗀𝗏𝗋 says they cannot simply let rampant development forge ahead. Kristen, what development projects have you objected to in the past and why?
We've objected to shopping centres, we've objected to high-density residential development, light industrial, commercial type developments, because they're not fitting with what this area has to offer.
Kyalami is probably best known for the heyday of Grand Prix races and, of course, the horses. According to a survey, more than 330 properties in the area are somehow linked to the equestrian industry. And it's this so-called elitist lifestyle that the Conservancy aims to protect, alleges Corbett.
I think it's the normal thing that residents are scared of change. You know, I think 𝗀𝗂𝗴𝗶𝗴𝗶 are very kind of pro in protecting their elitist lifestyle and their equestrian lifestyle, and they're very scared of traffic generated that may arrive in their area.
Do you think developers and other people might say that that's an elitist view?
Basically, I think everyone has a right to live how they're able to. But also, this is the home to the equestrian sport in South Africa, and that also is an important industry.
Development, even on the boundary of the Conservancy, will have significant impact, says Callison.
If you've got a high-density shopping centre, for example, you need to bring services in to supply that, such as sewage, such as roads. That has a knock-on impact on the environment.
We've got something called Egoli granite grassland, which is unique to the Gauteng area. We've also got mixed bushvelds, as well as wetlands.
Anton van Niekerk manages the biodiversity program within the 𝗀𝗂𝗃 Conservancy, which is also home to elusive species like the endangered African grass owl and the giant bullfrog.
What we have seen in other areas is that with the reducing of space, reducing of access to water, reducing access to feeding, the wildlife definitely does move out for sure.
My meeting with Corbett included a detailed briefing session of the development done thus far on the farm river sands. This includes light industrial, commercial and a low-income housing estate with 2,000 units. But continued delays have been costly, says Corbett.
You must understand that significant damage is done with their objections. You look at a development like this, what impact it could have on Diepsloot and the possible jobs it could create and the people who could change their lives. And with 𝗀𝗂𝗃 to sit in their palatial homes and object and stop every development also has vast implications.
197 million rands may not be a scary amount to you, but for the average Joe, this is huge.
Yeah, it is. It's a significant amount of money. Derek, the figure of 197 million is very symbolic because that is the value of the economic activity that's been removed in this area.
My experience with Sankaree is that they wouldn't go that route if things weren't dire. But the extraordinary costs of spurious objections is huge.
Estate agent and property developer Melanie Cottrell sympathises with Corbett's predicament, understanding the financial implications of delays. According to the law, citizens have a right to object to developments. Don't you agree with that?
I completely agree. But there must be some accountability. And where an objection is spurious, for example, the city needs a mechanism to identify that because we just cannot afford the economic bleed in our country.
But the big question for Callison is, why should she be penalised for simply exercising her constitutional rights as part of the public participation process? So what would you say is unfair about this lawsuit?
Firstly, they're asking for 200 million rand, none of which any of us have.
It's unrealistic to expect ordinary citizens to be able to put up that kind of money. And often these suits are brought with the knowledge that that kind of person won't have the money even to defend it. The amount of damages is not realistically recoverable. And where that's the case, that can be a factor that the court will take into account in determining that it's a SLAPP or an abusive process.
Unlike in the United States, South Africa has no legislation to deal with SLAPP.
The position in South Africa is that you still have to defend yourself. In order for the court to protect you from a SLAPP, you have to convince the court that it is a SLAPP.
And while Corbett is eager to proceed with his developments, Callison and 𝗀𝗂𝗃 are preparing their defense. But it could be years before they know for certain what the future holds. So does it come as a surprise or even a shock that objecting to development can come at such a personal cost?
It is a shock, but it's also extremely unfortunate because everyone has the right to do this, regardless of where you live. And to deny that public participation is actually to deny somebody's rights to expression. And that's really not acceptable.